billions of dollars. A host of celebrities of golf, tennis, and other sports followed McCormick's first client, Arnold Palmer, to IMG. Mr. McCormick's innovations in merchandising, licensing, and TV programming are credited with being the single most important influence in transforming sports into big business. Led by Mark McCormick, IMG today represents such major and diverse events and organizations as Wimbledon, the NFL, and the Noble Foundation. A major producer of TV programming, the group made business history recently as the first corporation to be named television consultants for the organizing committee for the 1988 Olympic Games in Calgary and Seoul. In this program, Mark McCormick will reveal the importance of street smarts, the ability to read people, and how to translate those perceptions into business achievement. He'll also show you how your actions are read by others in everyday business situations. Once you've finished this program, you'll understand the important steps needed to succeed in business without a business school graduate degree.
If you're selling something to somebody, the textbooks will tell you how to make a sale. They'll tell you how to present yourself, how to go in and sell a particular thing. Someone who's street smarts will get into a situation and will see that the person to whom he's trying to sell something has just had a total catastrophe happen. He's harried, he's on the phone, and obviously the timing is wrong for this particular sales pitch. The street smarts person will try to figure out something to do to get back in there when the timing is right. And he'll say something like, look, I really do have something I think you'd be interested in. I would like an opportunity to present it to you. I don't think this is the time. Can't we make another appointment? The guy who is following the textbook on how to make a sale, having gotten into the room to make the sales pitch, will kind of blurt out the sales pitch willy-nilly and have no chance. I think the ideal business temperament would be someone who has a sense of humor, has an empathy for people, an understanding of people, and can use his intuitive and innate feelings about people to maximize the business opportunities that he's presented with. When you're a child and you're trying to deal with your own parents and trying to get something from them, you sense the timing that's required because you know your mother, you know your father, you know their moods, and you know how to present yourself or your case, whether it's for a new dress or a new suit or the car on a weekend or a trip you want to take or some special privilege. You know what you want to accomplish. You wait for the right timing to present your position. That timing can involve the mood that your mother or father are in, or it can involve a lot of other extraneous factors, but it's all people reading. It's all street smarts, if you will. When you go to school, you are trying to deal with your professors to get grades, and you know grades are very important. And you know what a particular professor wants in the way of an answer because you've spent 6 months listening to him lecture and listening to his philosophies. That, again, is reading someone. It is being able to answer a question in a way that will best show your knowledge to the professor that's grading you. Now, I think so often when one goes to business school, one loses sight of these common sense, people reading, street smart methods, and rather tries to use the textbook, more theoretical axioms to deal with the business situation. And the business situation isn't that at all. Business is people.
One of the important lessons Mark McCormick has learned in people reading is the ability to distinguish the difference between form and substance. The ability to take what someone is telling you for what it's worth. In business, it can mean the difference between success and failure.
The difference between form and substance in dealing with people is immense. I think you've got to look beyond what the person says and what they really mean. Someone very often could tell you they're not going to buy your house, which you're trying to sell to them. And they could be saying a lot of different things with that sentence. They could be saying, your house is too expensive, it's in the wrong neighborhood, it's too far away, it doesn't have enough bathrooms. the form of it is, I'm not going to buy your house, but I think you have to dig beneath it to find out what they really mean and why they're not going to buy the house. And I think very often people don't look beyond it and just take on surface the form of what's been said. If, for example, somebody says, I am not going to buy your house, if you know why, you're then going to be able to try to answer the objection. If they say that the neighborhood isn't quite right, you can defend the neighborhood. If they say it isn't as close to my office as I'd like, you could say it's close to all these other things. If they say the bathrooms aren't in very good condition, you could say, yes, but the garage is fantastic. And if it's a question of price, it's good to know that. Very often you have to look beneath the surface and delve beneath the surface to find out exactly what's being said to you. And I think very often people just take at face value the surface statement and let it go at that there's not going to be any sale.
If being able to distinguish form from substance is important, how do you do it? According to McCormick, one way you'll never do it is by being the one who does all the talking.
I think people should learn to listen aggressively. You should listen not only to the words that people are saying, but as to how the person is saying it. People will tend to tell you a lot more than they mean to. It's very often a good idea to pause a little and let the person continue on talking. I think silence is a marvelous technique to enable one to learn more about where another person is coming from. People are uncomfortable with silence. In a social situation, they're uncomfortable with silence. In a business situation, they're uncomfortable with silence. What this means is that if someone makes a statement, I'm not going to buy your house, for example, and you don't say anything in response to that, he is going to elaborate on that, and you'll learn more about why he's made that statement. Television interviewers use that technique a lot. They just remain silent, and the other person will start saying more. But I think aggressive listening, which is the same thing as not only allowing silence to be there, but to listen very carefully to what the other person says, is something that everyone should do more of. So often when you're trying to sell someone something, what you do is you have in mind, I'm first going to say A, then I'm going to say B, then I'm going to say C. And no matter what the other person is saying, you still do A, B, and C. And while the other person is talking, instead of listening, you're preparing for your next sentence. I also think people should talk less. I think they should use silence more and listen more. People are too anxious to hear themselves talk, and if they've made what they perceive to be a brilliant point, they're too anxious to repeat it, rephrase it, and beat it to death. I think the best people in business tend to be better listeners rather than better talkers. Most of us have seen people in social and business situations who, by virtue of their silence, just seem to have an air of knowledge about them. You very rarely will have anybody call someone who has been silent throughout a discussion a fool. Most of the people that are called fools are people that have talked too much. So I think it's a very good axiom to follow to just talk less and to remain silent more in any business situation. Aggressive listening doesn't mean necessarily listening to the words, but it's listening for clues to what the person is really trying to say. It is listening to the intonation in his voice, listening to and observing particular adjectives that are being used, asking yourself why he's chosen one adjective rather than another, why he's chosen one verb rather than another. Has he really said, I will do something? Or has he said, I'd like to do something? Or has he said, it might be a good idea if we did something? Those are three entirely different sentences or phrases, and yet very often someone who hasn't listened very carefully will go back and report those as being all identical. Precise use of language and precise meaning of language has an immense business implication, and it's one that should be concentrated on and dwelt on rather than ignored.
Reading people, what they say or how they handle themselves in public, can also be an important indicator of what you can expect from their business practices. Mark McCormick recalls two people he encountered, Doug Sanders and Richard Nixon.
Now, I happened to meet Richard Nixon on two separate occasions in the early-ish 1960s when he was not in office. One night with Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus at a restaurant in Paris, and another night at a golf club where they were playing the World Cup Golf Championship. But he used the exact same 5 or 6 sentences to Palmer and Nicklaus that he had used with Gary Player. It was almost as if he had sets of sentences he used for a religious leader, an educational leader, a golfer, and whatever. And it made me think that no matter what the person in question had said to him or had been like, he would still said the same thing, which made me really question the sincerity of what it was he was saying and the sincerity of the feelings he was expressing. I compared that example to Doug Sanders, who was one of our first golf clients, who had a very kind of racy reputation as someone who hustled on the golf course and gambled a little bit, and he was a little bit controversial. And Doug, however, one time played a golf exhibition match in Canada, which I didn't even know he'd played, and our arrangement with him was we were entitled to a commission on his earnings. And one day I got an envelope in the mail which had in it a few $100s in cash, which was our commission on the exhibition we didn't even know about. And Doug had gotten paid in cash, and he paid us in cash. And here was a guy that had kind of a iffy reputation, for example, who was just being right down to the letter with honesty and integrity, and another person who was a major political leader in our country who made you wonder a little bit.
And whether it's a political leader or a network executive, there can often be a great deal earned just by watching the way they act on the golf course.
On a golf course, for example, there's something called a gimme putt, which is a fairly short putt, which generally will be conceded by one's playing partner or opponent. Some people, even after you've given them a putt, will insist on putting it into the hole and accurately recording the results. Now, my business translation of that is that those are people that it's pretty hard to do a favor for, because they're just going to do it themselves, and they want it right on top of the table, and they want everything, all the I's dotted, and they want all the T's crossed. Other people sometimes won't even wait for you to concede a putt, and they'll just take it. And sometimes they'll take it even if it's a lot longer than might normally be a gimme. These are people that I would say not only won't ask you for a favor, but they really expect favors from you. And then there's the more complicated person who sort of half tries to sink the putt, sweeping at it kind of one-handed. And if it goes in, fine, and if it doesn't, well, they weren't really trying, and they kind of count it as a gimme. And these people are the most complicated to deal with in business, because they have a capacity to self-deceive, they tend to exaggerate, and they would tend to round off the facts of a given situation.
We've all dealt with different egos, both large and small, in our personal and professional lives. Determining how strong someone's ego is can often present guidelines for a business deal.
A person who has a strong ego is someone that I would much prefer to deal with than one who has a weak ego. A strong ego is someone who just oozes self-confidence, has a good feeling about himself, and is very much upfront with most of his positions and feelings, and you don't have to be delving around corners and sneaking under the table to try to find out where the person is really coming from. The individual with a weaker ego is very often far more complicated to deal with, because you're not really sure what their expectations of themselves are, and for that reason, it takes you a lot longer to deal with them intelligently. Most very successful businessmen have a very strong ego. And if you can read and understand these egos, you can accomplish an awful lot. An ego can mean an awful lot of things in the context we're talking about it now. An ego can mean your own view of your importance. It can mean in a business situation that if someone can come up with a way where that ego can be tapped into to bring about a business result, then the business result that you want is much more likely to be accomplished. There was a case once of the CEO of one of America's Fortune 500 companies who desperately wanted to get on television, and whether or not a particular network was able to sell sponsorship of a golf tournament to this company was going to be dependent upon the fact of whether or not they would shoot this man and his wife sitting on the 18th hole in the gallery and identify him as president or chairman of the company in question. Fortunately for the network involved, this ego was well known in the industry, and the result was that as a part of the network's presentation, this factor was taken into consideration, and it was made very clear to the subordinates of the CEO in question that they definitely wanted the CEO at the event, at the site, and they wanted to visually show him on camera. And that's what concluded the television sponsorship in that particular instance. So there are a lot of examples where if you understand where a person is coming from, where his ego is, that you'll be able to accomplish a great business purpose.
First impressions, whether they're of someone's ego or even his manners on the golf course, can often make or break an important business deal. That's why the best business advice Mark McCormick gives is to weigh those impressions carefully.
First impressions in people reading, they can be guides, good guides, and I think the longer you're at it, the better you get, like anything else. As Gary Player once said, the longer I practice and the harder I practice, the luckier I get, and I think that's true in people reading. Usually I'll go, therefore, with a first impression, but I try to pretty carefully scrutinize them. I try to think them out. I try to test the water. I try to figure out ways of trying to be sure that the first impression is correct. And I also try to do some thinking about it. I remember once that Muhammad Ali said to me, he said, "I'm more famous than Jesus Christ." And I sort of dismissed the statement and sort of was a little bit appalled by it and forgot it. But I got thinking about it a little bit later on, and I started realizing that when you count up the millions and millions and millions of Hindu and Muslim countries and African nations and other non-Christian countries in which Ali was a national and international hero who really weren't familiar with Jesus Christ, the statement itself, which he made very sincerely, perhaps was more nearly the truth than I had dared to think at the time it was made.
So you finally read someone. You've determined how to interpret their conversations, their actions, created your impression of them in your mind. What do you do with those impressions? For Mark McCormick, Street Smarts tells you to be discreet.
Once you understand people, once you really perceive that you've figured them out, once you've read them and have determined, based upon subsequent research or subsequent contact with them, that you've correctly read them, I think it is most certainly a good idea not to point out to them all of the things that you know about them. Because if you do, then you're going to ruin any chance you have of using your own insight effectively. You can only use what you've learned, in other words, if you know more about him than he knows about you. Discretion is one of the most important things in business, as indeed it is in all forms of social intercourse or life in general. I think that in the business that we've been in, where we've been dealing with the confidential aspects of not only business aspects, but also personal aspects of many of the world's best-known sports personalities, being discreet is so critical that I can't overstate it enough. The last thing that we need to do is to start talking to Chris Lloyd about Martina Navratilova's business affairs, or vice versa. And we never, ever would do that. We had somebody that was once in our financial department who was a pretty effective guy, but he tended to be a bit of a gossip. And he was once in a discussion with Virginia Whät, one of our clients, and made some remark about something that Bjorn Borg was doing. It wasn't a very confidential thing, but it was just a little thing involving a particular transaction. And Virginia, who's got a playful sense of humor anyway, and knew that this fellow was a little bit of a gossip, was sort of trying to draw more information out of him, and got a little bit more, and told me about it fairly quickly because she was concerned for us and for herself and for the man in question. She said, you know, I really think you should be aware of this because I would hate to have him telling people about my business affairs, and I think you should talk to him. And we did, and the situation was rectified. But I think the sensitivity of dealing with private facts or private knowledge cannot be overemphasized in any business situation.
If reading other people is a critical part of street smarts, then consider how important the impressions you create are to others in your career, the way you greet people, the environment you create for your professional dealings. They are just as important as your ability to read others. It can mean the difference between a successful long-term business relationship or business failure. It can even mean the difference when you're trying to get a good table at a good restaurant.
I had a friend, the managing editor of Time magazine, Ray Cave, who, when we once went to a restaurant, which Ray had never been to before, he said to the maitre d', "Good to see you again." And I said to him afterwards, I said, I thought you said you'd never eaten here before. Why did you say, "Good to see you again"? And Ray said, well, you saw how quickly we got a table and what a nice table we got and how friendly the guy was. And I said, yes. And he said, well, that's because when you use the phrase, "good to see you again," it makes him think you remembered him and makes him kind of wonder, well, gosh, if I saw them before, I was probably pretty good to them before, they wouldn't have remembered me, and I'll be good to them again this time. Now, that sort of thing is sort of people dealing in a way that gets a positive result for you, which is a good table at the restaurant, which is what you're trying to accomplish. But I think there are a lot of first impression greetings that can be very ego satisfying to the other person. If you know, for example, that someone has just accomplished something from a business standpoint or a personal standpoint, to make reference to that in your greeting. You know, congratulations on the award you've just received. Congratulations on your recent promotion, or the acquisition you just made sounded fantastic. How did you ever conceive of such a thing? Words of that kind which make the other person think, God, he not only has taken the time to learn about me, he is duly impressed with what I've done, and since I'm impressed with what I've done, he must be pretty smart, and all of a sudden you have a good impression of him. That's something which can create a good first impression. Another friend of mine, who's the managing editor of People magazine, once told me that if she's having a business lunch in which she, being a woman, feels that maybe someone will think she can be intimidated or not taken seriously enough, she always orders a scotch and water at lunch. But she thinks it's kind of a statement of the fact that she can drink with the best of them, and she's not going to just have a Perrier with a twist of lime or a Kier or something like that, and she does that strictly for that reason.
When was the last time you met a distant business relationship and couldn't remember his name? It's embarrassing for both you and your possible new client. Personal greetings are important to make business deals more comfortable and more fruitful, and there are special ways to make sure those greetings don't lead to embarrassment.
People are very flattered when you remember their names. They are very embarrassed when they don't remember your name. As for myself, I'm not all that great with names, and so I figure that other people aren't that good with names either, and I always, unless I'm 100% sure that the person knows my name, first name and last name, I'm going to open up a greeting with, "Hi, I'm Mark McCormick." And if the person remembers that I'm Mark or that I'm McCormick or knows my face and doesn't know my name and is uncomfortable in grasping, I've solved his problem. Similarly, I'm encouraging him to do the same thing and say, yes, I'm Joe Smith, and this is my wife Susie, who you met in Phoenix last year or something. But I think for those people that have the talent to remember names and remember families, remember names of kids, I think it's a marvelous talent. I remember Jack Nicklaus once in the early 60s took a course on this very thing, on remembering names of people. And there's nothing that impresses you more than if somebody who you haven't seen in a long time greets you by name, asks about your children by name, references their school or their age or their hobbies and things of that kind. You're just so impressed with the person that you want to do things for them.
Being street smart means being able to read a situation quickly and applying your perceptions to that situation no matter how difficult. In the most frustrating of times, using your street smarts can lead to positive results.
How many times have you been at an airline ticket counter, standing in line, and the man ahead of you has just gotten there, and he's a little late for the flight, which is about to leave, and there's a problem with his airline reservation. And he has been told by the ticket agent that there's no record of his reservation and that the flight's full. Now, he starts screaming at the ticket agent. He starts saying he's a friend of the president of the airline, he's going to call him. He starts threatening to write letters. He starts being profane, obnoxious, aggressive. All of those things, and you sit and listen to this fellow, and at that moment in time, the only human being in the world that can get that man on that flight is that ticket agent, who is simmering on the inside at the way he's being talked about, at the way his company's being talked about, at the way he's being character assassinated, if you will, and he is saying to himself, there's no way this SOB is going to get on this flight. And a whole other approach would be effective 90% of the time, an approach whereby you say, look, I realize this isn't your fault and probably it's a computer error, but gosh, I've got this terribly important engagement or an illness in the family, and I really have to get to New York, and my office or my travel agent told me, or your airline confirmed to me that I had a reservation, and isn't there anything you can do, because I really be appreciated, and I know that this is the last thing you need to bother your busy day today, and to kind of put yourself in his shoes and empathize with him and his feelings. That's the way to get on the plane. Not being aware of the impression you're creating is something that is far too commonplace and ought to be looked at very hard by all of us.
You know that your time is important, and when someone wastes your time or forces you to make time you don't have, you go away with a bad impression. It's an important lesson to remember when you are taking advantage of someone else's time.
It is far better off asking for more time than you need with someone you're having a business meeting with. In other words, if you think you're going to need a half hour, ask for an hour, and then end the meeting in a half hour. And you've in effect given the man 30 minutes of his time back. That creates a very positive impression, so much more so than if you say, I'd like to see you for a few minutes next Friday, and you end up turning that few minutes in, which a guy will think that's going to be maybe a 15-minute meeting, and you try and turn it into an hour. Now he's getting restless, and he's considering you're wasting his time and you're messing up his day, and all of a sudden he'll leave that meeting with a negative rather than a positive impression.
Once you've got someone's time, take advantage of your own turf. If there's a choice of meeting places, remember how comfortable you feel on your own turf.
Once the relationship is established, and once you and the other party know each other, whenever possible, I think it is best to do the meeting in your office. You can control the timing of the meeting better. You can control the seating. You can control fringe time better. You can control when the coffee gets served or doesn't get served, and if you're in somebody else's office and just about to hit your key point in your presentation, all of a sudden somebody comes in with a cup of coffee. Do you want cream or sugar? You can control the phone calls incoming and outgoing. You can take them if you want to, and maybe a call will come in that is so impressive to the party sitting there that it'll create a positive impression. You know, you're sitting there and the president of some big company calls you and, excuse me, it's so-and-so, and he knows the so-and-so. Or you can stop all the phone calls from coming. Plus the fact that you're comfortable in your environment and he is just a little bit uncomfortable.
And if much of your business is conducted over the phone, You might be tempted to be more personable and answer your own phone calls. Mark McCormick has found a number of good reasons never to take incoming calls.
I prefer never to receive phone calls, although I will always return phone calls. The exception, of course, is personal friends or people I know well enough to be very abrupt with on the phone. My reason for this is that I want to pick my time to do my talking on the phone. I pretty much know how much time I have for phone calls or for a particular phone call. I pretty much know how long it's going to take me to do something. I like to therefore schedule my outgoing phone calls pretty carefully and in a particular order and to allow enough time for the one I need enough time for. Now, if a call comes in and I'm in a meeting or I'm about to go to a meeting and I need 10 minutes for the phone call and I've only got 1 minute or I'm already late, I can't devote the right time for that. And I'd rather just have my secretary say, Mr. McCormick's not in just now, or he's in a meeting, and can he call you back or something like that? Then I always will come back. Now, sometimes if a call comes in I'm not expecting, I will want time to reflect on what that call might be about, which more often than not, I'll know what it's going to be about, and I'll want to think about how I'm going to deal with it before I return it, as opposed to having the other man on the line while I'm trying to think about how I'm going to deal with it.
What happens if one of your clients wants to get out of a deal? You've worked hard to negotiate the deal, and it's important to your business. Do you take your client to court, or do you let him off the hook?
Very often there are very good reasons, and very legitimate reasons, and very plausible reasons why this company has to renege on the commitment. I mean, you can do three things. You can insist that they comply, and they will very often do it and be mad for having done it. You can insist that they comply, and then you have to sue them, because they won't. If they don't do it, you have to sue them, and obviously they're mad. But very often the best thing to do is to let them off the hook, because if you do that, they're going to think, God, that was really nice, because we really went on the limb, out on the limb here, and we really were committed, and these people let us off the hook. So they're now really ready to do some business with you in another area or at another time. One of the biggest and most long-standing commercial relationships we have was with Wilkinson Sword, the blade company, who back in the mid-'60s made a commitment, I even forget what it was at this point, to do something, and couldn't do it, really, because I think they decided to cut back on budgeting. It was, a very sort of not too dramatic reason for not wanting to do it, but it just wasn't convenient, and I told the person, look, that's fine, I understand that, but I hope you'll, do business with us when you have some budget. And he never forgot that. And he's told me many times since that made him feel like he just had to do some business with us, and he did. And the business got more and more every year, and Wilkinson Sword has been one of our best clients ever since.
Business and pleasure. Should the two ever mix when it comes to your clients? Mark McCormick has learned the hard way the dangers of keeping friendship out of a business deal.
I think you want to make friends with people you do business with. And I remember when I first started out with Palmer and Player and Nicholas, I was in a hurry. I was all by myself with just a few other people, and golf was exploding. I had the three best golfers in the world, and I was very insensitive to people's feelings. I didn't care about making friends. They wanted the best golfer in the world. They had to talk to me, and I was going to get the best price, and let's get over with the deal and get out of my office, and I want to do another deal. And all of a sudden I found people actually doing business with other golfers who were nowhere near as good as Palmer, Player, and Nicholas, and paying them even sometimes the same money that I asked for Palmer, Player, and Nicholas, just because they liked the person they were dealing with better. And I realized then that you had to be sensitive to people's feelings. You had to try to make them your friend and make them like you. And if they like you, they'll do business with you. Just because you've got the best product, just because it's at the best price. You need more than that. You need to have a good relationship with the people you're trying to purvey that product to.
Mark McCormick has these words on something we'd all like to strive for. perfection?
There's nothing the matter with striving for perfection, so long as you realize you can't really attain it. Striving for perfection really means striving for improvement, really means lack of complacency, really means not accepting what the outside world thinks is a good performance because you know you can do a better performance. All that is very good, but I think you can become a total nervous wreck if you try to actually be perfect, because you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to make all the putts, hit in all the first serves, throw every pass for touchdown, do every negotiation brilliantly, sell every time you go to sell, succeed in every endeavor you undertake. But I think it's healthy to strive for perfection, but to recognize that if you can just shoot under par for the round, that's really all that's possible.
Look around your workplace. Who are the people succeeding in your office, whether large or small? Have you ever asked yourself why? Mark McCormick has, and has come up with some interesting answers.
Two people might have the same degree of capability, but one of them knows and understands the timing and has the street smarts, if you will, to demonstrate his capabilities in the most effective manner to his superior. He's the one that's going to get ahead. He's the one that's going to succeed. When you look to see who it is that gets the promotion, that moves on the fast inside track to the top of corporations around the world, the man that gets ahead understands people.
Getting ahead in your company takes more than training and hard work. As Mark McCormick says, it takes a sense of street smarts, knowing how to read people, and ensure that your peers and those above you in the corporate structure are aware of you and receive a positive image of your role within the company.
Years ago, Lou Wasserman, the head of MCA, who is someone that I've always admired as a corporate executive and has been a bit of a mentor of mine over the years, used to require all of his executives to wear white shirts, not a colored shirt, and a tie at all times, and a dark suit, no sport coats. And I think up until the last decade, that was a very strict corporate dress code. But his reason for that was a very intelligent one. His business, or the business MCA started in, was booking bands, and the people that did that were perceived to be very unbusinesslike, checkered sport coat, cigar-smoking, open-collar shirt-type people. And Lou Wasserman didn't want MCA to be carved in that image, and he wanted it to be more of a business-like Wall Street look for very, very valid reasons. And he installed this dress code, which everybody adhered to. We've had the situation in our organization where a lot of our tennis executives, for example, will tend to dress like the tennis players. And of course, we're dealing with a lot of young tennis players, guys that are 15, 16, 20, 21, 22 years old. They come into the office in jeans and a tennis shirt and tennis shoes and gold chains around their necks and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's fine for them. And it may even be fine for our tennis executives to dress like that when they're out at tennis tournaments or when they're socializing with those clients, which is something that we encourage. But I have the opinion, like Lou Wasserman, that those tennis clients, when they come into our office, would rather have the executives in our office dress in ties and sport coats and looking like business executives, because I somehow think that they and their parents would get a better impression of the people that are managing the money, managing the business, managing the careers, the estates, the insurance, all that sort of thing, to be dressed like businessmen rather than like tennis coaches. And I think that dress code is hard to generalize about, but it's a very, very interesting thing. You can tell a lot about people sometimes from the way they dress and under various circumstances.
How much do you know about your job, especially the small details? For Mark McCormick, knowing the details, no matter how small, can mean the difference between success and failure when a next promotion comes up.
Our business is a sports business. I like it when people know the sports results from the weekend. I like it when they are aware of even distant sports results from other parts of the world that might affect some of our lesser-known clients. That demonstrates commitment to me. I like it when by accident I walk into the office late at night or very early in the morning and people are there, or when I would call the office on a Sunday and people are there. That's commitment. And I think that's something that always stands someone in very good stead with his employer and with the company for whom he works. Attention to minor details is also a very good indicia of what sort of an employee you have. I think, obviously, if in our case we are the consultants to the organizing committees of both the 1988 Olympic Games in both Calgary and in Seoul, it's obvious that anything to do with the Olympics and with that activity in which the television rights are being sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, it's obvious anything having to do with that is going to attract a lot of attention internally. Everyone will be very concerned about that. But it's the smaller detail. It's attention to more minor problems that an employee can show, which is more impressive. Somebody once said to me when Bjorn Borg was at the peak of his career, one of our executives in Europe was in charge of Bjorn's business affairs in Europe. And, of course, Bjorn was earning an awful lot of money from tennis exhibitions, an awful lot of money from contracts. And this executive was obviously quite proud about it. But it was fairly obvious that Borg was so good and so many offers were coming to us for his services and for contracts involving him that it might take a lot of talent to get the most out of those offers, but it certainly wasn't taking a lot of talent to get the offers. That was Borg's talent. More important would be the job that was being done by somebody for a lesser-known tennis player who maybe was a Romanian girl ranked, 61st in the world. Someone getting that girl a $5,000 contract and a $2,000 appearance and thinking about things for that particular player in many ways is more impressive to me and was more impressive to me than some of the telephone number contracts being done for Bjorn Borg. So it's very important, I think, to watch the way an employee deals with minutia and with his or her concern for the detail of a particular situation. And I think that is, along with commitment, something that any boss will look at in doing an intelligent employee evaluation.
The realities of corporations can sometimes stifle individual growth. Success in the organization is a very competitive process, and that competition often must be thought of in game-like terms.
There are, of course, a lot of general rules with reference to getting ahead, and one of them is survival of the fittest. There aren't as many vice presidents as sales managers, and there aren't as many presidents as vice presidents. Everyone has to recognize that there is going to be a little antagonism, even though it may be subtle, between different levels of management and different layers of the corporate pyramid. I think you have to be aware of those rivalries and the subtleties in those rivalries, and at the same time make your peers, who are actually your competitors, respect you and be your friends. If you're a boss and you're trying to figure out which of 7 people to promote to a new job, you obviously don't know everything about those 7 people. And let's assume those 7 people are all right below you, and one of them is going to become your assistant manager. Very often, you are influenced by what those 7 people say about each other. And if all 6 of them all say that Bill, who is the 7th, is just plain a phony and not the right kind of a person, that is going to be the death knell of Bill, because the boss is going to think, well, my God, 6 of his peers are saying that he's no good. They're all not criticizing each other, so therefore they should have a certain amount of respect for each other. And I think, therefore, if you haven't convinced your peers that you have talent or that you are someone worthy of respect, you have no chance at all. I think people should be very careful to be respectful of and sincere with their peers. I think they should help their peers without fearing someone is going to take the credit for the help they've given, take credit for the ideas that they may have given to their peers. I think giving help to your equals in a company, giving help to your peers is something which one should always do. Your peers are the people that see you socially, more or less, that see you in a different light than your employer, and they'll see through you a lot more easily. And I think it's just terribly important that to be liked by them, to be respected by them. I have had in IMG people who aren't really respected by their peers, but are liked by their peers and almost protected, if you will. People that for years I thought, well, maybe we really would be better off without this person or without that person, and yet his peers, even with his shortcomings, say, well, it would be a shame to have a company or our company without so-and-so.
If your organization is a large one, there are other departments which collectively determine the success or failure of your company. Scoring points in other parts of the organization may go unnoticed by the people directly around you, but not by those above you, and that can be a key to getting ahead.
Very often it is important within a company to understand the problems and needs of other departments and other segments within your own company. There are going to be times when you're going to need your staff functions, your legal department, your accounting department. There will be times when they're both going to be pains in the neck to you, where they're going to require you to file needless reports, cooperate with them on lawsuits or contractual information and things of that kind. And I think that the more cooperative you are with other people in the company, the more cooperative they're going to be to you. And I think that's, again, people reading, it's street smarts, it's common sense. I think from the mail boy on up, if you do something for the mail boy, you can be sure he'll do some things for you. You give him some tickets to the theater or some tickets to a football game or something, or go out of your way to be concerned about his family or his problems, and then you need some stuff done for you in a hurry, you'll get it done. And I think this cuts across all elements of companies, from receptionists to secretaries to other people's secretaries to, if you befriend the secretary of someone who is very important to you and to your career, again, take an interest in her, take an interest in her family, do the odd little thing to make her life easier. You may get an insight from her on how her boss really feels about you. And it's all dealing with people, and that's what business is all about, and that's what life is all about.
What happens when you run into trouble with a particular job in your company? Do you seek help from others within your department, or do you go it alone and try to figure it out yourself? For Mark McCormick, successful businesses and successful individuals can't move ahead without cooperation.
The phrase, "I need help," is a phrase that should be used more and more in business. I think it is not used very much. I think people feel that if they say they need help, that shows that they are incompetent, they haven't done their job, that shows a weakness, and I think it shows a maturity. I personally use that phrase more and more the older I've gotten and the more experienced I've gotten in business, because I recognize the nuances of so many situations, whether they be legal nuances or whether they be business nuances, that I really am just incapable of dealing with a lot of situations without expert help. And I don't think there's anything weak at all in seeking help from your peers or from the outside or from others. And I think that people have this great hesitance to say, "I need help," and to pretend that they can do it themselves, and then to do it themselves and do it badly. And they don't realize that what happens is that their bad result is going to be very quickly recognized, and it's going to be so obvious to the outsider, to their employer, that they certainly should have gotten help because they certainly messed things up. Asking for help really is a way to expand your own knowledge, your own expertise, and your own value to your company. And it also demonstrates a willingness to work with others, which is terribly important to the success of any company or any team effort. I think people that won't give help are people that are insecure, are trying to hold on to a little pocket of power, let us say, and who want to be able to demonstrate to an employer or a boss that they're the only one that can do a particular thing. And I think that's very, very short-sighted. The person that refuses to give help when he's asked isn't going to have any kind of a strong support system when he needs one, because everyone needs help. And I think there's a lot of give and take in that, and I think that accepting help and giving it are going to be remembered and acknowledged by any sort of enlightened management.
If asking for help is one key to succeeding within the organization, admitting you were wrong is another. Mark McCormick says you have to take risks to succeed in business, and taking risks requires being wrong some of the time.
The most important phrase that one can use in business or in life is the phrase, "I was wrong. I made a mistake." For some reason or another, people are just afraid to say that. People try to disguise mistakes. People try to pretend that, well, they weren't really wrong. They didn't quite have all the facts, or somebody else did something wrong. It wasn't them that were wrong. To be able to admit one's mistake is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of a good executive, a sign of a good employee. Everybody makes mistakes. And I think the ability to recognize it and say, hey, I was wrong. But I learned from it, and I won't ever make that mistake again. That's the key to it. I think any enlightened employer will recognize, even his most talented employees are going to make a lot of mistakes. The more you delegate, the more new horizons that you explore, the more pioneering one does, the more mistakes are going to be made. And the last thing you want to do is to create an atmosphere within a company where nobody takes any chances, nobody takes any risks. Because if you do that, no company is going to grow, no company is going to have tremendous success. You've got to take high risks to get high rewards. And I think you have to encourage intelligent risk-taking, gutsy management, aggressive decision-making. And I think you have to recognize there are going to be mistakes, but I think that it's important for the people that make the mistakes to know that all they're being asked to do is to be right more than they're wrong. And the higher percentage of time that they're right, the better off their career is going to be and the better off their company is going to be. But not to be discouraged, on the other hand, at their mistakes. Everyone gets discouraged about mistakes. Everyone gets discouraged about chains of mistakes, that if you hit a bad streak or you bogey 4 holes in a row or something like that, you get pretty down on yourself. But I think it's important to say, hey, wait a minute, last week I did this and that, and next month I hope to accomplish this and that, and overall things are pretty good.
Information. It can be the currency of achievement within the corporation. If you don't know the who, what, where, and when of decision-making in your organization, chances are you're going to be left out of those decisions.
An employee of a company is more than anxious to talk about the inner workings of his or her company. And I think if you ask that person in a way such as, look, you probably know more about your company than anybody else, tell us how it works, that more often than not, the person you're asking that to will tell you more than he or she probably ought to. There's no better way to learn about a company and to learn about who is going to be the next superstar. And that's who you've got to be a friend with. That's who you've got to get to know, the person who is going to be the next star. Because very often the one that's already the star or the decision maker has his own friends, has his own business that he's doing, maybe in the same sphere of activity that you're in. And I think what you're trying to do is to get the man that's going to be there next. Because everybody that's going to come next is going to want to make his own imprint on the company, his own decisions. And if you're new and he's new, what better time to get it to happen?
As you gather intelligence within your organization, you should be looking for areas that have a track record for quick growth. And according to Mark McCormick, often one of the fastest developing corporate departments is overlooked.
Most American companies really, because of the size of the American market and the size of their businesses within America and their perceived opportunities within America, have pretty well ignored the international marketplace. Most American CEOs see the foreign marketplace, the international marketplace, as a major expansion opportunity in the future. And most of them feel that their own international operations could be substantially improved. And I think if I were going to go to work for a company and wanted to make a contribution and wanted to be able to move quickly, I would try to get into the international division, because I think there would be a host of opportunities within that division, generally speaking, in most American companies.
Being right doesn't always mean you are going to quickly get ahead within your organization. If your superior doesn't agree with you, self-righteousness can turn your wisdom into an attitude problem.
One of the real no-win situations that you can get into is to go one-on-one with your boss or your superior in any form of dispute. This is not the relationship where there ought to be confrontation. As wrong as your boss might be on a particular issue, if it's important to him, there's no reason to confront him, to contradict him. Especially there's no reason to confront him or contradict him in front of others. And you've got absolutely no chance if you do this. And yet you find very often people who disagree or who feel strongly about an issue actually trying to take their boss on. And I don't know whether this is just the sort of self-destructive nature that some people have or not, but I think the best you can hope for if you violently disagree with a policy or a thing that's happened is to pick the right time to spend with your boss or with the person that has set forth the policy or established the policy, and to try to reasonably explain your position, but then to back off and surrender from it in deference to his authority if he doesn't agree. Like everything else in life, this kind of a situation involves tact, timing, and dealing with people. If, for example, you are a young boy or a young girl and you've just gotten a driver's license, you want to borrow the family car for a weekend, and it's really important to you, and you know you've got to get your father's permission for the car, to use the car. And he comes home from the office at 5 o'clock at night, and he's obviously had a terrible day at the office, and he's depressed, and he's mad, and he's arguing with your mother, and he's in a terrible mood. That isn't the moment you're going to say to him, Dad, can I have the car for the weekend? You're going to wait until he's had his dinner and watching television or had a drink and is relaxed, and you're going to pick your time. You know your father. That's what people seem to lose sight of so much in business. They lose sight of common sense. They lose sight of the situational aspects which dictate so definitively against the confrontation. And they breeze into a confrontational situation with absolutely no hope. Instead of waiting for the right moment, going to your boss and saying, now look, I know you've said this is the policy, and I know you've said I shouldn't be at this meeting, or I shouldn't do this, or our company should do this, but I'd like to explain why I think maybe that was a wrong decision. But that sentence has got to be timed at the right place. It probably shouldn't be in front of anybody else, because you don't want a confrontational situation where your boss has got to justify his authority to another. I think loyalty is one of the most important attributes that any employee can have. It's actually a form of trust. If there is a way to demonstrate that loyalty to your employer or to your company, you have gone a long way toward getting yourself on a fast inside track to advancement. If you're unhappy with your job, talking about the fact that headhunters are after you for another job, or talking about going out looking for another job or other job offers or your value in the marketplace, puts the whole thing in the wrong context in terms of your own advancement. There are ways of presenting dissatisfaction about compensation matters, about titles, about other things that are important in job satisfaction or ego satisfaction from a job standpoint. Threats are not one of them. you should go to your employer and say, look, I would never want to leave this company. I'm so happy. It's where I would most want to be in the world, and I enjoy my work. I particularly enjoy working for you and working in the division that I'm working in, but I just really feel that I'm not being compensated, or I'm not receiving A, B, and C commensurate with what my worth is today. I think there are ways of doing that other than as sort of a veiled threat that are far, far more effective. I had a friend in New York once who set up a financial consulting firm, and a very successful one, and 4 or 5 of his key employees came into him and said, look, we want to have a big piece of this. We've helped make this firm so successful, and we're not getting enough. And the fellow said to them, well, why don't you just all leave? Because I'm not about to do that, and I'll just set up another firm and do the same thing I did before. And, of course, they all backed off. But that was the wrong approach to take, and I think so often people don't understand that. I am familiar with one particular company where it became known to the chief executive officer that the general counsel, who was earning $100,000 a year, had been offered a job for $150,000. This knowledge came quite coincidentally and quite accidentally to the CEO of the company in question, and did not come from the general counsel. And the fact that the general counsel had not said anything about that offer, and had not tried to leverage that offer into a raise or into more benefits from the corporation in question, was so much more advantageous to that man than anything else he might have done. Now, I don't know if he planned some way for the CEO to find out about that offer. If he did, it was brilliant, because they found out about the offer. They said, my God, he hasn't even tried to leverage it. I think we should do something for him. And I think that's loyalty to a company. And I think there's nothing that an employer or an owner or proprietor of a company wants more than loyalty from his employees. The knowledge that even if somebody offers a little bit more money, even if some of the clients want to leave and go with one of the executives, there's nothing like loyalty. We had an instance a number of years ago where some of our clients tried to take 1 or 2 of our executives and set up another management company. And our executives obviously considered it, because the clients were fairly big clients. But in the end, they decided to stay with the company and showed a loyalty to the company, which I haven't forgotten. I think a good way of showing loyalty is to speak to outsiders about your company with enthusiasm and in positive rather than negative terms. I think we're all familiar with those people that at cocktail parties and in other social gatherings badmouth their company or make fun of it or talk about the silly systems or say negative things about the product or things of that sort. That, generally speaking, will get back to the company. And similarly, if one is very positive in his feelings about the company he works for, that also will get back. And I think getting it back second or third hand is often a very, very effective boost for one's career within a company. Because when somebody comes to me and says, I met one of your employees on a plane and got talking about the company, and he didn't even know I knew you, and he was just so enthusiastic about the company. That, of course, is far more impressive to me than, when somebody comes to my office and says, I really love the company and I'm really loyal to it.
If you are a dynamic person and one who is seeking a challenge in the organization, you may find yourself unhappy with a lack of change in your job. You might find yourself in a dead-end situation in the company. Do you pack it up and head for another organization? For Mark McCormick, that's the last step you take.
People get bored, I think, because they've lost a challenge or they've lost interest in what they're doing. And usually that is from a repetitive type of work. I think, again, you cannot generalize, because some people like doing the same thing every day. for years and years and years. I think most people don't. I think most people like a little bit of variety. I think most people ought to strive to, in a business context, change their job focus fairly periodically so as to avoid job burnout or job boredom. That's something which, again, at the right time, should be presented very frontally to your superior, to your boss. I think it ought to be presented in the context of, I really like this company. I've been here now for 6 years, but I've been doing the same thing for the last 3 or 4. I'm not as excited or interested in it as I was. I would like to maybe try something else within the company. I think, conversely, from an employer's standpoint, it is terribly important to be conscious of the attitudinal factors that are affecting your key personnel. I think very often an employee will not go to his boss and say, look, I'm a little bit bored, I'd like to do something else, but rather he will listen to other job offers or start thinking about other jobs. And there have been a couple of instances within our company where I've criticized our second layer of management for not being conscious enough of what their subordinates really were feeling. We had one executive who was doing a marvelous job for us, who got a little bored, perceived that he'd have to go on doing the same thing within our company for years and didn't really look forward to that, was traveling too much and about to get married and didn't want to continue traveling that much and didn't want to continue doing what he was doing. So his boss should have been aware of that and wasn't. He probably should have made his boss aware, but irrespective of that, his boss should have been sensitive to that. So what happened was he went somewhere else and found a job, and by the time we found out about it, he'd already taken the other job. And as it turned out later when we talked about it, we had an opening in our Canadian office. I mean, he could have gone up and had a major job in Canada, and that would have, for various personal reasons, been something he would have loved to have done. He said, I wish you'd have told me about it 3 months ago. And we didn't, and we weren't sensitive enough to that. So I think it's important from the employee's standpoint that he be, when boredom starts setting in or job burnout starts setting in or lack of job enthusiasm starts setting in, that he go to his or her boss and say, look, I love this company. What else can I do? Because I'd like to contribute to it in some other area which is more interesting to me. An employee can always try to make more of his or her job than the job definition calls for. What that can do is to prolong the time that one has job satisfaction within a particular sphere. There's nothing that an employer would rather hear than somebody saying, look, I think I can do more work, or I can also take on a little bit of added responsibility. I've got this job down pat now, and I think I'd like to do A or B, or the company ought to consider doing something else, and maybe I could assume that responsibility and get an assistant to help me with some of the things that I'm now doing that aren't as interesting to me. And I think that people very often figure that some huge computer somewhere way above them has ordained that jobs must be described in this way or that way, or that the person that does this can't do that. And I think they don't direct their thinking or thought processes toward how can we restructure this? How can I restructure my job? How can I help the company in another area? I think all employers are really more than receptive to getting creative and intelligent thoughts, suggestions, and ideas of this sort from employees. No matter how small a job is, and there is, of course, the traditional American story of the man that starts in the mailroom and ends up being chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 company, the way that the person attacks the job can be very indicative of where that particular individual is going to end up. Whether you're working in the mailroom or working in the company cafeteria or working as a handyman around the office or as a night guard, there's that little extra thing that you can do always to bring to that job something that wasn't there before, and you can do the job just super efficiently. There are an awful lot of people who can learn an awful lot by serving. The example, for example, of the waiter who can run a restaurant a lot better for having waited tables and knowing what the customer is really looking for. And I think you can use that example all throughout a business hierarchy, from the mailroom to the secretarial assistants to the receptionists and what have you. And I think it's just a question of taking pride in your job that is something that is important to an employer and certainly should be important to an employee. That kind of attention to detail, that type of performance will go recognized and will stand the employee in good stead as he or she climbs the corporate ladder. And once they've climbed it, having been there, will make them be a better executive.
Moving ahead in the organization, as Mark McCormick has pointed out throughout this program, takes more than the technical and business skills you may have picked up in business school or on the job. Whether it's getting along with your peers, dressing for success, or learning the rules of the game, success comes from understanding people.
The man that gets ahead has street smarts. The man that gets ahead can read a situation and know when to complain to a superior about lack of advancement and when to be quiet about lack of advancement, when to vie for a new job or new assignment within a company and when to step back from it, when to go above the man right above him and when to stay within the system and not try to go around or above the man above him. That's what it's all about. Timing and being able to demonstrate to the right person at the right time within a company what your talents are is the most important factor in getting ahead. Very often you can have all the ability in the world and none of the right people recognize it. And very often one will try to get the right people to recognize it, but to use the wrong method and to do it at the wrong time. The person that gets ahead is the one that is sensitive to the timing factor, sensitive to the political factor within the company, and is able to make his superior aware of his talents at precisely the right moment.
We hope you have enjoyed this production of What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School. Notes from the Street Smart Executive by Mark McCormick. Text copyright 1985 by Mark McCormick. Production copyright 1985, Random House Inc. All rights reserved.